I can't wait to just be hearing 120 decibels of just Jaguar power on you.
It's gonna be so loud. Even the girls in the office on the other side will be like. I try to tell them too, and they're like, "It'll be okay. We're all the way over here."
Yeah.
I don't know.
So we got it in the pit. Mike did some measurements to try and pre-level it as much as possible. It's almost perfect, so we just got to adjust the two on the far end there just to bring one corner up a tiny bit. And then we're pretty much good to go. We got the side adjustments to wedge it in there, but it's looking good.
Mike, where do you learn these techniques?
When you end up looking for something for half a day because you dropped a socket, yeah, don't do it again.
It's alright, they're magnetic. Plus I got really long, skinny, garbage scooping alien arms.
Well, I mean, we could pull it out, but for half a foot of duct tape, we can make it so we don't have to.
That was a Trailer Park Boys reference in case you didn't hear. Corey, Trevor.
Represent.
There you go. Okay. Take one. Two. It's a really fun day today because we finally got our dyno on the ground. Mike's just fired the car up. Finally got our dyno in the ground. Had to cut a hole in the slab, dig it out, build a pit, install it in there. We were running some pretty fun stuff today because we've been working on 2300 displacement blowers for the Jag Land Rover 5-liter supercharged engines. And we finally got to do our final proving runs. Been testing those for a year. But, as you saw in the last episode, we got the Super-Vantage running. We got it to the track for a little bit of a shakedown. And Chris mentioned in the video we were running quite a conservative tune on it. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay. So like minimal timing, not aggressive at all on the AFR, just safe everything. So now that we know it's working properly, it's time to put it on the dyno and see how much power it's making. Now, we didn't get the opportunity to run this car itself when it was stock on the dyno, which presents a little bit of a problem because we need to know what the baseline is in order to get our after figures. Fortunately, we have on this exact dyno during its previous ownership at another shop run a couple of 4.3 Vantages on it, so we have baseline data for a stock 4.3 Vantage, and that'll allow us to calculate from that wheel horsepower number back to the crank number that we know that it should make from Aston, and then figure out what this is making. So we can give a solid delta between a stock Vantage and the Super-Vantage. So Chris is upstairs in the lunchroom. He's going to come down, we're going to hook up to it, and we're going to start messing around with timing and AFR a little bit and see if we can optimize it and see what we can do. Got Dirty Mike and the boys over here. Hopefully not having a soup kitchen. Talk to me, Goose.
So just setting up the RPM. This one's testing.
So we know how fast the engine's going.
It's important.
Yeah. So there's a few ways you can pull RPM when you throw something on the dyno. One of them is that you can actually pull an ignition signal.
Didn't like that.
Installed it. Yeah, one is you can pull an ignition signal. But sometimes you find that like that signal isn't super reliable. So we were actually running the supercharged F-type there, and you could actually see the dyno graph almost go backwards because if it loses a signal a little bit, it thinks the RPMs are coming down. So another way you can do it here is that the dyno, you can set what RPM you're at. So essentially, if you want to say I'm going 2,000, you hold it at 2,000, set that on the dyno, and then it knows what the engine speed is. It's a little bit rudimentary, but you can usually get it within 20 RPM or so, which is sufficient to produce a graph that you can then compare and overlay against something else. So Mike's going to get that set up on here. We'll start data logging it. We get the AMDS out so we can data log it with the factory computer and see where we're at.
first.
It's so funny. I can't believe they have to wear that. So we had to look at the preliminary numbers and kind of ran through what those look like relative to an original car and roughly where that puts it. We haven't really added a bunch to it, so Chris is going to put a little bit of timing into it. When we get another 10 to 20 horsepower, we'll see. So just doing a little bit of fine tuning just so we got it right where we want it on our 94 pump fuel. And 94, okay, so this is a common thing that people either ask us or are unclear about. North American gas, European gas. In Europe and in some other parts of the world, the measurement that you see on the pump is RON. RON stands for Research Octane Number, which is the measurement technique that they use in a lab essentially to figure out the octane content of the fuel. In North America, we use something called AKI, or sometimes called PON, P-O-N, which is Pump Octane Number. That is a combination of RON, the Research Octane Number, and MON, which is Motor Octane Number, which is just a different testing criteria. It's just a different way that they test the fuel. And in North America, what they do is they take the two and they average them. MON usually produces a result around 10 points lower than RON does. So if you divide that by 2, it usually works out to an average of about 5 points. So when you look at octane on a North American pump and it says 93, that is roughly the equivalent of 98 RON fuel in Europe. So I said pump 94, that's what we have here in British Columbia. Our fuel is not great. We find Washington State 92 is a little bit better than our pump 94. There are different additive mixtures in different regions. But essentially what we're talking about here when we say pump fuel, 93 octane North American, 98 RON.
The more you know.
This has been a public service announcement.
Yeah, right, exactly.
We're very light on the ignition, on the spark itself. So we're going to add some more spark to it. We're only at maybe 13 degrees. It's still a lot when you're applying boost to this motor, but so we're going to look at the log, see what it's achieving, and add some more timing to those areas. I have to do 2 different tools. So to check for misfire corrections and misfires, I have to use something like AMDS. And then when I want to check for ignition, it's just a faster tool. I use HP tuners just for the convenience of it, and I can see that ignition. So I got to look at that log, and then I can change my windowless setup here to have more ignition. AFR seems to be okay. It does lean out a little bit in the upper RPM, so I might add some more fuel to it at the upper. When I say upper, I'm meaning maybe above 5,500. I'll add some fuel. And yeah, right now I'm just in a thought process, trying to think about what we can do. So we don't want to obviously ruin anything, so that's where I'm at.
You guys found the correct one?
Yeah.
Can you run the camera through that a little bit?
So you've got your stock lines are dotted or etched, and then you've got your torque, you got your horsepower, that's stock. And then now basically with this kit, this is our horsepower and our torque. So we're at 469 power to the wheels, and this is 405 power to the wheels. This is not corrected. And let's say just take a point for the stock on this dyno, it does 281.
281, that's 281 at the wheels. So if this baseline dyno was a 4.3 liter Vantage, fairly low miles. So if you take 281 and divide it by 380, that gives you a correction factor of 0.7394. If you take 469.4 divided by 0.7394, it gives you about 635 horsepower. So this is putting down about 635 at the crank. Torque figures. So that says 242 and a half at the wheels. These make 302 stock. So that gives us a torque correction 0.802. This says 405.7. So So that gives us about 506 foot-pounds. But what's interesting about it, if you look at it here, Brandon, we've got peak torque here, but people talk about something called power under the curve. You could look at two dyno graphs, and one could, the peak number could be significantly higher in one place. But what you're actually looking at here that's really significant is if you look at this torque curve and you look at this torque curve, you don't just have more power here. You've got more power everywhere, right? Like, I believe some of these dyno programs will actually make a calculation of averages or area here, so you can look at it and go, okay, you actually have this much more torque for this much more power band. So the peak horsepower number is fun. They're pretty much the same up until about 3,000 RPM. There's no difference, which is actually kind of nice if you just want to drive around town and you don't want something undrivable. It doesn't really start to produce anything until about 3.5. And at that point, you can see massive curve separation.
Well, produce. You're
Well,
still making peak over your peak power with this setup at 3,500. So
yeah, absolutely.
it doesn't take off, but you're still making more power at 3,500 with this kit than you are at 7,000 RPM stock. So just for perspective on that one.
So, it's not like the Roots style blowers, the twin screws, like we were just running on the F-Type, where it's going to make more immediate torque. But in some ways that makes more sense for this car anyway. So you still have that like urgency in the upper RPM, which is kind of one of the fun things even about driving the stock cars. But once you hit 4,000 or 5,000, it's like totally different car.
Yeah, and this file is still the conservative file. We haven't changed it. It's the same file from the track at Area 27.
Yeah.
We haven't changed nothing in the car. Just as is, put some gas in it, and away we go. And there's nothing special about the gas, just pump gas.
We're talking about 469 and 280. Like, we're as good as 200 wheel horsepower more at peak. That's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a lot. We're well into the 600s with this. Like, it's pretty comfortable. So,
Well, you're in DP11 territory now.
more than a GT12. Let's just say that. Okay,
Yeah.
so we have more power than a V12 6-liter normally aspirated engine in the highest trim that they produced it with by about 35 horsepower at the crank. Where you might actually, if you look at the torque, like that's where you're going to find a V12 has maybe a little bit more grunt. They make peak torque at 1900 RPM, 2000 RPM, so they're going to be a lot squarer down here.
But they got to plant it.
But they're also at 420 foot-pounds at peak. We're at 405 at the wheels here, so this is probably making around 80 or 90 foot-pounds more than a stock V12 6-liter engine does. Granted, you got to get into the upper part of the RPM, but I think in a straight drag, this should probably pull a V12 pretty comfortably. So
It's going to take it in the upper. I mean,
Yeah.
the V12 is going to have a hard time launching. It's got a lot of torque low. It'll just slip unless you put some hoosers on it. But not many people are doing that. What do we do? Do we add something to the file?
yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
What
Let's
are
see
we
what
doing?
it'll do.
Yeah. Right now, I checked AMDS. Well, we got a dealer tool, and it's not misfiring at all. So there's no knock correction. We're at 0 still. Misfires are still learned, and we got a ways that we can go.
Okay, let's see what we can do. We got to get through this fairly quick here because we got to run up to Area 27 real quick and do a couple burns down the back straight and an F-Type before they close for the day. So let's do it.